Hey guys, my name's Frank and this is my workshop. Today's video is servicing Cub Cadet hydrostat, the hydrostatic transmission for Cub Cadet tractor. Specifically the older Cub Cadets. I believe this one is off of I think it's a 105. Anyway, so this is the transaxle, this is the hydrostat, and the transaxle out of the Cub Cadet, and it's tilted up on a wooden stand. Now normally it would be in a position, horizontal like this. This would be the top. You, of course, you have your wheels on it. So it's been removed from the tractor, and so that we can look at it better, and put here on the stand for ease of operation. One of the advantages of working on the hydro tilted up like this is that you don't have to drain the fluid from the entire transaxle. It holds 7 quarts of hydraulic fluid. Alright, so there's a couple things you need to disconnect. One is this, the suction fitting here, which is pretty simple. Just undo that. I think it's a 1-inch fitting. Undo the second one here. Just take this elbow off. So that's one thing. The second thing is you have brakes. This one has internal brakes. If you have external brakes, it's a little simpler. With the internal brakes, this arm may be in your way of the 2 bolts which hold the 2 of the 4 bolts which hold the hydrostat to the rear axle. In order to get this out, you can work with a box end wrench or open end wrench and take these 2 bolts out, but it makes it a little more difficult. If you undo the adjustment screw which adjusts the brakes, you can remove that, then knock out the pin which holds this brake arm in, and just knock that out. Okay, pin comes out, and that screw goes through this hole and intersects this groove to hold this pin in place. That then allows us to remove this arm, get it out of the way. The push pin for the brake, we'll just leave that right there. Alright, let's go ahead and remove the filter. I loosened it earlier, so it's easy to come off. And there are 4 bolts which hold it on. 9/16 socket, all you need. 1, 2, 3, and the 4th one I'd already taken off. Okay, so at this point, all it does is it lifts out. We'll lift it out, set it on the bench, and then I'll reposition the camera so we can look at it. So here I have the hydrostat set in just in a vise here on the end of the bench, just to support it, because you've got the output pinion here and you got a input shaft there, and so putting it in a vise here is just a convenient way to manage it. One of the things that's really important when working on a hydrostat is cleanliness. This has been out before and been cleaned, so I'm taking it out again because I need to fix a problem with it. But if you're taking it out of a tractor and it's dirty, you should take it to your parts washer and clean it. as carefully as you can. You want to get all any loose paint, any grease, any dirt off of it. Because one of the things that will really mess up your hydrostat, and if you're taking it apart and putting it back together, I mean, it's like any transmission. There's a lot of small passageways. The fluid in it needs to be perfectly clean, and you need to be pristine in your cleanliness in dealing with one of these transmissions. All right, I'm just laying out some paper here on the table so that as I remove parts of the hydrostat and place on the table, everything will stay clean. There are 6 bolts which hold the cover of the hydrostat on that are 9/16, and then there's 2 which are 3/8 inch, but they require a 12-point socket. These others will, could take 6 or 12-point sockets, but you need 12-point sockets and 3/8 here. These 2 bolts are 5/8 inch. They have to come off first. This is the charge pump. The purpose of the charge pump is to take fluid from the bottom of the transmission up through the filter. It is it's a small gear pump in here, and it pressurizes the hydraulic fluid to 500 or 600 psi, and then feeds it to the pump section of the hydrostat. The pump section is driven by the tractor's engine. It takes the rotational motion of the engine drive shaft. It is a variable displacement pump, hydraulic pump, piston-based hydraulic pump, and we'll look at that when we get it apart, and directs the hydraulic fluid to the motor section. The motor section is what has the pinion output, which drives the transaxle. So the 3 components of the hydrostat is the charge pump, the hydraulic pump section, and the hydraulic motor section. And hydraulic fluid flows through this thing and then returns back to the transaxle. All right, so let's take the charge pump off. Charge pump is, as I said, 5/8 of an inch, and we'll loosen the 2 bolts. Now, before you take it off, you have to match mark it. And this particular one has been marked. I filed a little groove in the cover and in the charge pump. So it's just marked, so because the charge pump can be put on either way, it must be returned the same position as it's currently in. If you put it on the other way, it won't work. So mark the charge pump cover housing and the hydrostat cover. Now they call this the middle section. This is the charge pump, the middle section, and the rear section, but most people just call it the cover. All right, so then the charge pump lifts straight off. Be careful, there's an O-ring here inside the charge pump cover. We'll keep these parts together. All right, then this is the gear pump. You have 2 components. You have the gears, and then there's a pin. It's a very small pin. Don't drop it down inside. It goes through a hole in the input shaft. Okay, so now we're ready to take the charge pump cover itself off. 3/8 inch 12-point socket on these 2 bolts on top. Nine 9/16 for the remaining bolt 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So you see that the top sprung up. The piston blocks are spring-loaded. So we'll discuss how to put it back together and deal with that. So there's 6 bolts that come out, and we'll set them aside here. You will actually have, it's not on here, an adjustment bracket which will bolt to these 2 holes that will come off as well. Alright, so then the next step, get my rag, clean my hands off. As I said, keeping everything clean is really important. Lift up the cover, straight up, and carefully turn it over. Okay, so now what we see here is one of the valve plates is stuck to the cover, the other valve plate has stuck to the piston block. So taking it off and holding it in the same orientation, let's put it back on the cover. Now it indexes on the cover. You can spin it around, it locks in place. Same with this one. It's just stuck on with, it's just suction from the oil that's on it. It's stuck on there, isn't it? Alright, we're going to leave it. Alright, so it only fits on one place. Now these 2 plates are different. This one has 2 notches cut into it. This one has 4 notches cut into it. And so this one is for the motor and this one is for the pump. So this is the pump section and the motor section, and we got a gasket here. We'll pull the gasket off. Okay. Now, so you can see the 2 piston blocks. This is the pump and this is the motor side. This input shaft and this is the output shaft. Now on the pump side is the swash plate, and this is the swash plate moving in the back here as I move the trunnion arm, and this is what controls forward and reverse speed on the hydro. So in this position it's in forward, in this position it's in reverse. Alright. Now the swash plate controls the travel of the pistons, which are on the underside of the piston block. So this is a variable displacement pump, because this is a constant displacement pump, and we'll show the fixed swash plate on this motor and the variable swash plate on the pump side. Alright, let's take the piston blocks out. I'm going to take the motor block out first. There's a lot of small parts here, and you want to be careful you don't lose them. It just slides right off the shaft. Okay, so here it is. This is the piston block. These are the slippers and the pistons, which fit inside the piston block. So that's the motor. And I'm going to set it up here, and we're going to keep these separate. So that's the motor side, corresponds with that. This is the pump side. Alright, so again, the pistons, get them back in their cylinders. Obviously it's a little fussy getting them all in their right positions. The idea is to keep them all in their current cylinders. Okay, so that those are the two piston blocks. You can see this is the movable swash plate, and this swash plate is fixed. And the way it works, pretty simple. When you operate the swash plate, you change the piston positions as this piston block goes around. The pistons go up and down. It pumps hydraulic fluid through these valve plates to the motor block, and the motor block, the hydraulic fluid pushes these pistons down against this angled plate, which then which doesn't move, which then causes the motor block to turn this shaft. So it makes that block spin due to pressure against this plate. And these little slipper feet press against these plates, and they all have holes in them, so hydraulic fluid comes through them to lubricate as they spin around. So that's essentially how the hydrostatic transmission works in very perhaps even oversimplified terms. Once you've got the hydrostat disassembled, then you're looking for damage. And what's the most common type of damage here is the slipper feet, this retainer ring for the pistons being damaged by towing. The most common failure, at least that I've seen in these hydrostats, is the tractor's been towed. These tractors are not designed to be towed. They have warnings against it. I mean, you can push them, a few feet, 20, 30, 40 feet, but no faster than walking speed, 1-2 miles an hour for a short distance. There are people who've hooked them up to ATVs or trucks and towed them, a distance at high speed. And usually what that does is it destroys the transmission. And I've taken them apart where the slippers have broken and piled up to the point where they've actually punctured through the side of the housing. So of course then it loses, it becomes locked up, fluid comes out of it. I mean, it's trash at that point. If you do have one that's been towed and been damaged, if the case is not holed, there's not a hole in the case, then you potentially can replace slippers. If you have another hydrostat with parts, you can replace the slippers and the pistons and put it back together. And so that's one possibility you can do. It's almost as easy, and maybe even easier, to just get another hydrostat. I mean, the things are largely indestructible. They last a long time. I mean, this is 50 years old. It shows virtually no wear. So it would be a simple matter to just get a used one. You can get one for $50 or $100. I think I paid $60 for an entire spare axle, rear axle, and hydrostat assembly. So they're not expensive. There's lots of them around. Just get a spare, and if it's working, you can use it as a replacement. Keep the other one as for parts if you want. The other reason to take it apart is to replace seals, and there's seals in all of the penetrations. I mean, there's oil seals at both ends of the trunnion shaft. There's oil seals. There's also here at the rear output, and then on the charge pump there's a seal for the input. There's bearings. I've never seen bearings fail, but I mean, I suppose if it's run out of oil, there's bearings. There's bearings here, and you can buy a kit which you can use to replace all those parts. Those kits are still available. Also need the gasket for the cover, the O-ring for the charge pump cover, and that's about it. All right. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the swash plate. There's a very specific process for doing that, and we'll cover that next. Okay. So the next step is to remove the swash plate, and it has 2 spring pins in it, one on each side. The instructions in the service manual say to mark your punch exactly 15-30 seconds of an inch from the end, and this is a spring pin punch, roll pin punch. All right, so we're going to do that, and when we knock those pins in just under half an inch, the pins will be inside the shafts, and we'll be able to remove the shaft. So we're going to work very carefully. You don't want to drive them too far. If you drive them too far, you're basically hosed at that point. So work carefully. Let's do the other side. Got it pretty much. The pins should move pretty easily because they're constantly immersed in oil, so they should not be rusted or corroded. Okay, I haven't quite gotten it far enough yet. You want to work very carefully here. When you get it in the right spot, the shaft will spin. There we go. Now the shaft is spinning. The shaft is moving relative to the swash plate. And there we go. Okay, so there's also a washer on the side here. All right, so that came out, and you'll see that the pin is completely inside the shaft. All right, and so that's why the dimension is critical. All right, so that freed up one side of the swash plate, so now we got to do the other side. All right, so I need to drive it a little bit more. Work carefully. More. I think I'm really close. Just a hair more. It's okay to take your time, and there we go. All right, so that shaft came loose. See if I can get it out now. There we go. So that shaft came out. All right, so now the swash plate itself can come out, And you notice there are two bosses on the back of this. There's a thin boss and a thick boss. The thin boss goes toward the top. So when you reinstall it, you must install it with this thin boss toward the top of the housing. Okay. All right, so the issue at hand is this bearing that the input shaft rotates on is loose in the housing. Now, I mean, it's sitting in there, but it came loose previously and I knocked it back into position, so I've had this apart obviously once before. But we're going to remove this bearing from the housing, and then we're going to clean it, and we're going to reinstall it with some bearing set adhesive. So let's take this out. All right, removing this, you'll see how loose it is because a few light taps and it comes right out. It should not come out like that. It should be a solid press fit. Okay. So next thing to do is to clean this housing so that adhesive will adhere. So that's what we're going to do next. Okay, to clean the housing, I'm going to use some just some spray cleaner, solvent, and what we want to do is remove all the oil from that area so that the adhesive will adhere. So that's the first step here, is to clean that carefully. Okay. The next step is to use the surface prep. It's actually an activator for anaerobic adhesives, basically super glue. So we'll put some of this on, and it says to clean and dry the surfaces, apply this to the bonding surfaces, allow surface to dry, and then apply for 3 to 5 minutes, then apply the adhesive and assemble the parts. All right, that's all it takes. So we'll let it dry for several minutes. While that's drying, this is what we're going to use. It's called bearing mount adhesive, Loctite. Got at the local auto parts store. The bearing off. So I just hit it with some of that solvent to clean it off. And we're going to apply it to the outside of the bearing. A smear. Don't want to get it on the bearings, but just a light coat. All right, we still got a couple minutes to wait. So I've applied the bearing mount adhesive around the outside of the bearing. You don't want to apply so much that it gets into the bearing itself. So you just need a thin coat. And we've waited several minutes here. Alright, so the next step is to go ahead and replace the input shaft back in the housing. And we'll tap it in position. Okay, now I mean it's just it's an easy slip fit because I guess it was just through vibration or wear or fatigue, or perhaps it was maybe not properly seated when it was originally assembled, or maybe someone else has had it apart. It's 50 years old, so who knows, you know, what's going on with it. Anyway, so that's glued back in there, and it takes it can be reassembled in an hour or two, and then it's fully cured in 24 hours. So we'll come back when we can do some more assembly on it. Okay guys, that completes the disassembly and repair of the Cub Cadet hydrostatic transmission. In part 2, we'll reassemble, reinstall, and I'll show you how to test that your transmission's working. Oh, look what I got here. Got my good buddy. How's my good buddy doing? This is Brutus. Say hi, Brutus. Yeah? He's a good boy. I'm a good boy. Alright. Alright, so that's all for now. Look out for part 2, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.